And I think the first thing that we'd really like to say, and to remind ourselves as well as you, is that curating is actually an emerging discipline. It's still emerging in the UK, never mind the kind of conversation we've had about China. And emerging disciplines are like young children. They can be quite naughty, and they can be quite willful, they can be quite silly and irritating, and they can be quite inspiring. So we're sort of, occasionally we think to ourselves, you know, we've been a long time doing this, but we have to remind ourselves that we're not, I don't know, art history or other disciplines with a much longer history. And I guess the other thing that I wanted to remind myself about when we started to make this is that we hear such a lot about the economic revolution, the economic boom in China and its transformation. But we actually don't hear much about the transformation, the equal transformation of what I'm going to call my sector, our sector, the museums, the galleries, and creative practice in the creative economies. And the whole, again, the whole messy rise of lots of different things competing for attention. And very little understanding from where we all are is how it will all settle, what will emerge as more important. And if we knew that, well, we would be in consultancy positions and commanding multi-million-dollar fees. But it does seem to us the very right time to reflect on these changes and to maybe focus attention on curating and what is curating, why is it relevant to China, and why is it relevant to the UK. So we wanted to kind of pose a few, I guess I'm going to call them snapshots, and we particularly wanted to ask Ning and Eric, who've given us two fantastic and quite different models of practice in China. But we kind of stuck to this 30-year period. I think for us, another little bit of, I suppose, an interesting moment for reflection was about 6 months ago. We were invited to the British Council to listen to your Council of Cultural Affairs at the Embassy in London, Zhao Wei-Chang. And his task was to talk to an invited group of UK artist professionals and explain to them what the new policy from the Chinese 18th National Congress, how that might impact and be relevant to us. And he made some very simple and quite direct points. And the first one was that for, in his view, and culture was now a Chinese national objective and indeed a key priority. Okay, politicians can say these things and they can say, okay, what is that all about? But I think there are some interesting potentials and interesting changes that at least we can understand and see where we might contribute and work with China and indeed in the UK. So, one of the things he was talking about was, if you read the Financial Times, we often hear these statistics about China, but in 2020 he was making the point that the cultural industries in China are set to represent 15% of the total GDP and to emerge as a key industry in the national economy. We know that China has now the world's largest art market, and we know that it's developing your auction houses, as well as obviously some of the models that we've got, Christie's and indeed Sotheby's. And we know that design, because we represent the specialist area of creative design, we know that design is creeping on after, much slower, but still significantly after the model of art. So we're obviously interested in that. And we do know, or at least we know because Zhao Wei-Chang told us, that museums in China are being asked to change their approach to these policy changes and to offer or to contribute to give China an international competitiveness. So when Eric was talking about, people talking about what do tourists want from a museum maybe in Hong Kong, you know, we are asking ourselves in Manchester and cities across the UK, how can museums, what is their role? Are they going to regenerate urban regeneration for us? And of course, content, the next and all-important question of content. And we know that in China there have been a dramatic increase in private museums. We were given some stats, and over the last sort of 10 years there have been 536 new private museums, and they now represent 15% of the overall total in Chinese museums. And also there are currently 60 university museums, a big element of the UK cultural life, as in the University of Manchester's great university museum, if you get a chance to go and see, is a wondrous example. And perhaps the largest of these of the university museums is CAFA in Beijing. And it's one of, I saw what and how they were collecting around printing type. It was amazing and awe-inspiring. And of course we have examples like the New Western Design Museum in Hangzhou, which houses Tobias' collection, the China Academy of Art. So museums are definitely no longer seen in China as the public service, but they are required, even if they do not fulfill their brief, to build growth. And a new kind of curator is going to be needed to meet these demands. Okay, China has got, as we indeed faced a similar situation in the UK 10 years ago, they've got to change or reform or adapt their museum system, and I'm sure all of these things are to come. And to achieve, because they have made the statement that they will not wholly or heavily support individual museums and institutions. That can no longer be the model. So what is going to be the model? Well, what the key messages that we took away from our British Council meeting 6 months ago was that there was going to be stronger links between academics and industry. That contemporary art and design will play a bigger role. I know these questions have come up in the new museum. The museums will be no longer collecting, that's obviously going to remain a key element, but collecting something I'm going to call heritage, but that they will be required to play a more active role. And if you want to see how a museum has transformed itself in this context, look at the last 10 years of the V&A. It's a little political or collecting or museum policy manifesto of how a big museum can do this. So it's a question of opportunity and a potential for new curators, which 10 years ago Donna and I really started to explore. And in 2000, we set up the MA Curating programme with the then director, Paul Thompson, who is now director of the Royal College of Art. The Design Museum had celebrated, it was just over 10 years old itself, and the reasons why we did it were absolutely simple. There were simply no curators of design who were available to work in the museum, and we wanted to create our own homegrown curators and indeed engage and lead in that field. It was as simple as that, and we wanted the Design Museum to be what I'm going to call, and we call them, a laboratory of practice with curators like Donna herself leading on a whole series of examples in different disciplines. So, although this partnership was created locally, we definitely saw it explicitly in a bigger national and international context. So I'm just going to run through a few of here. I mean, when I go to China, which we do a lot, we run a number of projects in China, and of course with Chinese curators who come on board, they often ask me, well, what's curating and what is curating, what is design curating? So we do a little bit of marketing and recruitment. We do a little bit of trying to get the audience on side to explain some of what we're going to call the depth of curatorial practice. And we also try and explain that in our view, and we know a little of this because we have spent some money on auditing all the career destinations of our 12 years of graduates. So we pretty much know exactly where 80% of them fall are, and the range of jobs across the creative economy internationally that they have taken up. So we feel fairly confident about talking about what our graduates internationally, where they end up, and they don't all end up in museums. And of course the design museum that Don's going to briefly give you, because Don's going to try and compete a little bit with Eric and talk about those new designs. Our new design museum in Kensington, so I've got a couple of little images to show you of that. And Donna will really talk now a little bit about the Design Museum.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Design Museum in London. And for those of you who are not, we were founded in 1989 by the entrepreneur Sir Terence Conran. And we're one of the world's leading museums devoted to contemporary design and architecture. That's our clear focus. And really our mission, I suppose, is to contribute to the public understanding of design and architecture through temporary exhibitions. The exhibitions programme is at the core really of what we do. Our learning programme and the various events, our public programme is really key. And we have a collection, a relatively small collection of about sort of 3,000 objects. And we were founded in 1989. Our origins really lie with the V&A through a series of exhibitions that were known as the Royal House exhibitions that took place in the basement of the V&A, which Terence Conran and Stephen Bailey, who went on to become the first director of the Design Museum, initiated a programme of exhibitions that really brought contemporary design to the fore. They very much wanted to place the focus on design, the design that surrounds us, industrial design in mass production, and to really sort of highlight the importance of contemporary design and the impact that it has on all of our lives. And that's a mission that we still very much sort of continue at the Design Museum. This is our building currently at Shad Thames, very close to Tower Bridge in South East London. But I would say as a design curator, well, I've been curating design exhibitions for many years now, and I've been at the Design Museum for about 12 years. And through that time, I think now we've really hit, some very exciting times for design museums and for design curating generally. And the Design Museum itself is actually in the middle of some very exciting changes, which again some of you may be aware of. In 2015, we're going to be moving from this site on the riverside, on the banks of the River Thames, and we're going to be moving to a new home on Kensington High Street. It's a building, this is the building before any construction started. We're sort of quite way into the build now. But this is the Commonwealth Institute, and this is a 1960s building that has really remained derelict and empty for the last 15 years. But it was a fantastic museum during the sort of 80s and 90s that told the story of the Commonwealth as it was then. And then the museum closed, the collections were moved, the exhibits were moved elsewhere, and really the building remained. It became sort of a bit of events, it was hired for various events, but became derelict and empty eventually, ultimately. And the trustees of the Design Museum were looking for, really it's the next stage of the Design Museum's development, and looking for potential spaces, perhaps to build a brand new museum. And looked at this particular building and saw great potential, and as you can see from the interior, great potential in, perhaps being able to create a much larger design museum in London. So John Pawson, we basically decided to move forward with this particular building, It's a grade 2 listed building, so there is actually very little we can do in terms of the exterior of the building, which is fine. And it's listed because it has an amazing roof structure and space in which to house those events. And this building will give us 184 seats for all those events. We'll have a library, which will make us accessible to the museum's archive. Something that I've been working on recently is assembling the first archive of the museum, which really documents the history of the Design Museum. And we're going to expand to look at the history of design museums internationally. So that archive will be accessible within the library, as well as elements of the collection will be available to researchers and to students. We'll have enhanced retail and catering provision, a fantastic shop, a cafe, a restaurant, a members' room. So all of the things that, where we've sort of outgrown our current building, and the new building on Kensington High Street will not only give us all of those spaces that we need to really develop into a world-class museum of architecture and design, but also, we're going to be reaching out to a much bigger, broader audience. So very interesting times for us at the museum. But one of the key benefits, as I touched on earlier, of moving to Kensington, is the creation of a new permanent collection display at the new museum. And the entire top floor will display our collection of 20th century and 21st century design. And we're going to make it accessible for research and learning activities. And objects from the collections, we're in the process of curating that space now. Objects from the collection will be used to tell stories effectively, to demonstrate how design has shaped, is shaping, and will shape people's lives in the future. And the new museum displays are being developed under the overarching concept of defining design, currently working title, with really a twofold purpose: to explain design, but also to show some of the definitive designs that have changed our past. And it's going to explore design very much from the perspective of not only the designer, but the manufacturer and the end user. And really, I just want to say something about design and curating, because since opening in 1989, I think the Design Museum has really helped to focus interest in the work of the design curator. And we are unique in the UK in focusing exclusively on contemporary design and architecture. Internationally, we're one of a small number of high-profile design museums, which include MoMA in New York, Curating, the Design Museum in Germany, for example. But there are many more, there are new design museums opening across the globe. But design and design curating practice are not static disciplines, and both are constantly changing. And I think that design curation has become really one of the most dynamic and fast-emerging fields of practice in recent years. The number range, when you think the number range and scale of design exhibitions alone, has increased dramatically over the last decade. Many museums, particularly in London, are integrating design into their programmes. In addition, the growth of courses in curatorial studies, both in the UK and internationally, have demonstrated growing awareness of the work of the curator, and our own Longmate Curating Contemporary Design, which we set up in 2001, was really at that time one of the first curating courses to focus on curating practice in contemporary design. And I think it really served to demonstrate a wider growing interest in the work of the curator and the emergence of related debates. So, design curating practice for me, I think, has evolved radically over the past decade, where the term curating has been applied to activities and events outside the traditional confines of the museum or gallery. And these varied destinations reflect the diversity of curating in a contemporary context, and which now includes curating retail displays, design festivals, design weeks, public programmes, studio tours, and so forth. And there are, as we've seen, increasingly more design museums opening around the world, with China establishing its first design museums in Shanghai and Shenzhen, and actively building very impressive collections of contemporary design. So really, once a nascent field of inquiry, design curation, for me, has emerged as a very specific site of practice on an international scale. So that's just something. And something I just wanted to tell you in our current location. I just left the Design Museum in London in the middle of installing our next exhibition, which is on the work of the designer Paul Smith, British fashion designer. And his career spans over 40 years, so it's a very comprehensive overview of his work, but also his his world, his creative approach. And many of you are visiting London before the 9th of March. We open the exhibition next week. Please do come along, it would be great. Please do come along to see the exhibition.
And we teach the course on a Tuesday, and if you're in London, you're very welcome to pop in and say hello to us. That's an open invitation to all of you. So, and you've had your plug for your next exhibition, so we're going to move on and just really try and just scope out a few of the projects that we tried to start. We're quite proud of the fact that we've been to China. We often go twice a year, and we work on projects with Chinese organisations and universities. And we try and connect those Chinese curators. This is our little group engaged with the V&A on a new V&A drive to develop digital curating. So we always say we follow the work. We look for areas which will employ our students and be new sites of practice. So that was just the project. But we also are very proud of a long-standing relationship we have with the Sino-British Fellowship Trust. And they actually funded both Ning and Eric's talks here, so we're very grateful for them, particularly today. But they also generously gave us, and extended to 2020, a scholarship for an emerging Chinese curator, and that started in 2006. So alongside that, we usually take, I guess there are maybe 6 to 8 Chinese curators each year on our course. And so we're building what I'm going to call a family, a network of curators who now have their experience and are working in galleries and museums. And they give us tremendous insights and knowledge back. That's just a little poster, it's absolutely can't read, but it just gives you a little feel. And they're very different. Dan Yang, for example, is a designer who wants to understand curating. She doesn't want to be a design curator, she wants to continue as an emerging and now very successful designer herself, who has a curating expertise to support her own practice. And Kay, who was our first, he started events management for HSBC Bank. He's now completing that connection between curating and commercial with a PhD currently at Cardiff University. So very different locations, and Ning, you now know her work very well. So as diverse outcomes in terms of career in China as there are in the UK. And we also are very keen, this is our course is a year, so she's just graduated, and we're very keen that our curators engage in the contemporary bridge between London and China. And this was a fantastically popular event, so we also did Korea. And Lynn curated a series of talks at the London Design Festival. Lots of people came. People would say we don't have an opportunity to engage in actually meeting and face-to-face talking. And that's something I think has been a theme that's come up a lot today. So a whole range of things. And when we know something that is absolutely, very close to our hearts, like Thomas Heatherwick's Pavilion at the Expo, we applied to be an Expo small event, and we ran a project with China Academy of Art, and we had a little installation and event in the Thomas Heatherwick Pavilion in Shanghai, and then we had a event in London Design in September, responding to Heatherwick, which was curated by our students and China Academy of Art, and that relationship was ongoing. The students produced a little project called Tobias, where they organised a series of events. We got I'm going to describe this relation to her now, because her influence and her contribution to collecting design is so well known. We got her to host and share a little first contemporary curating in China workshop, which the students documented and published, and they wrote articles on the other members of the group. Dan Fall's if you don't know her work, you will start to know it, because she's really emerging as somebody who is confidently taking that kind of Chinese tradition, modernity, and a new generation, and really translating and transforming that into a series of very inspirational objects, of which this is one of her very early pieces, actually. And we also try and do simple and pragmatic kind of online projects. So a part of this China Academy of Art, we asked the students, but from both organisations, to do something which everybody loves to know about. Everybody loves to know what the new talent is looking like in the degree shows. It's a kind of constant. I've been loving to know, see it myself for 30 years. And so they each picked what they thought were the most interesting work from China Academy and from Kingston, and they placed it on a little website and wrote a kind of critical commentary, a little exhibition, and published just some small publishing. And again, just to sort of wind up, I do projects myself and try and promote or, I guess, talk a little bit about where we think design is going. And so, actually, for Eric's the first real Beijing Design Week, we did an install in Power Square, and we hung these huge meter-length posters, which were about the collaboration and a kind of exchange between UK design and China design. And they worked incredibly well for us, and then we took the posters back and we hung them outside Kingston on our tower, and we had it for a sort of nice kind of continuing dialogue. So it was all about what design can do. I should have put what design curating can do, Donna. It's a little trick there, but they were about exchange of ideas. And that was something that is going to be the critical element. Plus, I hurried on and lost my slight credible. The final, I suppose, message from our British Council briefing was that China wants to actively explore opportunities to showcase contemporary practice, well, not in the UK, but internationally globally. And that's where we want to step in and work in partnership. And we're very interested in what we call new sites of practice. And I always get frustrated when people sort of talk and say, well, we're interested in new sites of practice, and they say, yeah, but what are those new sites of practice? Well, for us, specifically, I suppose we've made a bit of a USP of science. We're very interested in cultural diversity, maybe less the technology and the cities things that I've posted there. But one major project that we've done is that we have done 2 big projects with British Council. And what this is one of our science curating projects. That's all it is. And it ran as a competition to over 50 Chinese universities. So they post their ideas online, and it works like our famous X Factor competition. Last year, 130 teams start, they get whittled down to 40, 20, 6 in the final, and then the winning prize, well, the 6 finalists win a weekend in Beijing and a live competition, and the winner wins a week in London. But that's the British Council want to market university expertise. Of course they do, but our interest is really on working collaboratively. So for us, for Donna and I, the fun of the project was working with a team of people that we don't normally get a chance to work with to develop a collaborative science. So Tim Malloy is head of design at the Science Museum. Rebecca Lynch is a trained scientist herself and curates in the area of science. And Tony Dunn runs design interactions at the Royal College, and his work is very much based in new technology and science. So we all sit down, we come up with our brief, and then we have the absolute pleasure of working online with a diverse number of teams and seeing what they're thinking of themes that we pick. The first one was the science of sleeping, And the second one was the science and the future of food. So, why curating science and why? Well, we can see that communicating science is the driver not only in the UK but also in China, and we can see a role and jobs for our curators. So that is for us a double agenda. And then finally, because I'm keeping my eye firmly on the time here, just thought I'd show you another of our projects, which is about something which actually is at the heart not only of our work in China, but our work with a number of other different countries, including Africa. And that's one of the great USPs of the UK. It was often said in our Olympic Games that every team that came to London had a home team already in the city to cheer them on. And it's something we're incredibly proud of. This ability and this richness that diversity brings, which is very, I think, unique, particularly, I'm going to say, in the City of London, but something that the rest of the UK shares. So we asked our students to curate a supper, an evening, where there would be some displays, and I'll just run you, but people would actually sit down and eat. But the idea was to celebrate the contribution of immigrants into the UK, what they brought. And I hope you're all going to sort of taste it this evening, but Manchester has allegedly some of the finest Chinese restaurants, not only in the UK, but internationally. So, and we wanted to talk about how diversity is so enriching. And the curatorial concept was really, really simple. We took different countries, like Zimbabwe, and we took Afghanistan, and we looked at what food element they brought to this country to cheer up our actually sometimes quite abysmal food. So we asked them to do little Zimbabwe things on our Scotch eggs and mess about with our great tradition of English pies by introducing Afghanistan elements like this is rhubarb. So thank you for listening, and thank you very much.